Hag Sameach. This year, mid-September through mid-October, is a crazy time for Jews. One holiday quickly follows upon another, so much so that one almost doesn't know which is coming and going. I can say the same for all the September Matsuri that Shelley and I experienced in Japan. It seemed like every shrine, small or large, has a festival sometime in the same period. Of course, it is not a remarkable coincidence or even a hidden coherence of messages for those who can see and understand. Instead, like ancient and modern Israel, Japan is in the northern hemisphere, and this is the time both of the autumnal equinox and the fall agricultural harvest. The harvest was a time of celebration, or in bad years, intense mourning. A successful harvest means there'll be enough food for the winter and that famine would be averted for another year. Today, in first world countries, we are part of a global market and little feel famine's effects. Yet in Africa and parts of Asia, they still pose a significant threat. Even in Japan, we had the tiniest taste a few winters past with a butter shortage due to a bad winter for Hokkaido cows. Markets ration customers to only 1 or perhaps 2 packs of butter, causing no doubt great suffering and deprivation. While our COVID-related shortages were not due to a famine, I suspect the feelings engendered were much the same. Non-destructive rain, enough for growth, is one of the principal necessities for a good harvest. Therefore, water often plays a central role in Thanksgiving rituals, prayers of hope for future seasons. Several years ago, Shelley and I just happened upon a small local matsuri during our first short stay in Tokyo. The drums summoned us to the little neighborhood procession near our hotel. Somewhat inebriated, chanting young people enthusiastically carried their mikoshi, their portable shrine, through the tiny streets. As they passed, the watching bystanders sprayed and threw water over them. This strongly reminded me of Sukkot's focus on rain, expressed for me through the sound of the shaking of the lulav, and by the memory of shooting water or spray ribbon at the Kiddle Davener during the Geshem prayer in Shmini Atzeret, which I experienced in Elmira. In India, the spring holiday of Holi has a similar water spraying ritual. These customs express the life-giving importance of rain, and yet for many of us, its lack is only expressed in brown lawns and dead grass, and perhaps dirty cars about which we bitterly complain. Even the need to boil our water over the past week here in DeWitt was a reminder that we have ready access to water that we can boil. Water is a necessity for life, and its provision should be a fundamental human right. Yet even here in North America, impoverished communities have been left without water in wealthy first world nations. Government indifference and inaction allowed Flint, Michigan in the United States, and more than one First Nation reserve in Canada to be left without water. What is the fulfillment of their fundamental human right to drinkable water? Indeed, multinational companies are even buying up water rights across the globe, potentially denying local communities access to their water resources. During Sukkot, our tradition reminds us that the rains come from God, and therefore water should not be auctioned off to the highest bidder. Journeys and immigration also form a significant theme both for our autumnal festivals and in many Japanese matsuri. Sukkot commemorates the journey through the desert as we move from Egypt to Eretz Yisrael. We experience this journey as we ourselves dwell in rough huts, Sukkot, during the festival. Indeed, during the High Holy Days, we are reminded that Abraham himself immigrated to Mesopotamia with his wife Sarah to the land of Canaan. In Japan, the constant presence of the seven lucky gods also calls immigration to mind. These gods include Ebisu, Daikoku, Bentan, Fukurokoju, Hotai, Jirojin, and Bishamon. They visit Japan on their treasure ship, Takarabune, each year. Interestingly, these 7 are not indigenous, but are also drawn from Indian and Chinese sources. Indeed, only Ebisu is a Shinto kami of fishing and is a native Japanese deity. Yet coming as immigrants on their ship, perhaps in a way as refugees, these diverse gods bring luck to Japan. These themes come together for me in this holiday season, as I have read of the continuing refugee crisis inundating much of the world and exacerbated by COVID. Sadly, the reaction of many continues to be non-welcoming as borders are continued to be closed and intolerance continues to rise. Their presence is often greeted with fear and loathing rather than with a spirit of acceptance, kindness, and mercy. Some countries lag behind their people, and in others, people lag behind their leaders, with the sum result that not nearly enough has been done to help suffering people. Our rabbis teach that Rosh Hashanah celebrated the day when humanity was created. Reminding us of our universal kinship, the rabbis ask, why was one human being, Adam, created while God created all the others in their multitudes? One answer, made famous by Schindler's List, clearly establishes the importance of each human being, no matter who they are. Our tradition teaches that if one saves a single life, it is as if one has saved the entire world. And indeed, the Quran echoes this Talmudic dictum with an identical formulation. To the author of this statement, each of us represents a whole world of potential, both within ourselves and through our descendants. Therefore, each of us is important and unique. Interestingly, when thinking of a golden rule for humanity, people often quote, "Love your neighbor as yourself," found in Leviticus. Yet there is a much more profound verse in the very same section of the Torah, namely about 16 verses later. The stranger who resides with you should be treated as the native born, and you shall love them as you love yourself, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. Our rabbis constructed a tradition based on obligations to the stranger and the necessity of providing care for all who are disadvantaged. Judaism has always stressed that experience is the great educator. When Jews look back at our history, we are obligated not to see it just as events of the past, but rather as events that we participate in and which give us insights as to how to shape our lives and the world. On Sukkot, we re-experience our ancestral suffering as strangers and as the homeless. Whether from violence in the Middle East, or from famine in Africa, or endemic poverty in Central America, the challenges of refugees is the defining moment of the beginning of the 21st century. There are a number of questions. Have we learned from the horrors of the 20th century, or are we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past? 80 years ago, the world ignored the plight of refugees from the Nazi horrors, and millions of people died. More recently, we were mostly silent at the horrors of Rwanda and Pol Pot, followed by the deaths of millions. How many more people need to die before we realize that each of us is responsible, one for the other? Like in Japanese festivals, our communities are enriched by their diversity. And like the lucky gods, the people who are now refugees can often bring unexpected gifts. Indeed, as our tradition teaches, each of them has the potential to build an entire world. Marc Chagall, Albert Einstein, Thomas Mann, Marlene Dietrich, and this is just a small number, were refugees who enriched their country and the world. There were many, many more. This year, as we celebrate Sukkot, let us move beyond fear to a sense of obligation. Will we ensure that all humanity has access to clean and drinkable water, a fundamental human right? Will we work to welcome refugees? Will we remember what it is like both to be welcomed, but also, sadly, to be excluded? This year, I hope that we will rejoice with the stranger and love them as we love ourselves. I want to wish everyone Hag Sameach as we move into our Sukkot festival.